So, Amazon just recently released a preview of um, The Lord of the Rings Ring of Power. And it's sort of like a prequel looking at other Tolkien's works before The Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson. And I absolutely love The Lord of the Rings. I even bought this box set on Tolkien. It talks about there's a biography in there. Another is the Master of Middle Earth, a guide to Middle Earth, and Tolkien, a look behind the Lord of the Rings. So I'm looking forward to the Ring of Power to see what that would turn out like. Hopefully, people are saying hopefully it should be better than a Game of Thrones. And also, because of these release and also the release of The Wheel of Time, people have started discussing the whole idea, the whole casting idea, or how they will portray the story. And some people are already up in arms about that. They are saying that one of the worst things that they could do is to make the story, the series, sort of diverse because it's going to be like a woke version of Lord of the Rings, and that is unacceptable for some people. And to be quite frank, I sort of see where they're coming from because people tell stories. People have been telling stories all their lives, and people tell stories based on their beliefs, their ideas, their unique standpoint, their frame of references. And people are even saying that Wheel of Time was, or suggesting that Wheel of Time was destroyed by the inclusion of diversity, meaning it's supposed to maybe maintain a, who knows, white culture, a white representation that perhaps the book reflected. And so people are saying no, others are saying there should be representation of black characters and all that. But I'm somewhat conflicted over that because I see where they are coming from, like I said. And if you look at movies like um, TV programs like Game of Thrones or The Lord of the Rings, Clash of the Titans, Harry Potter, Chronicles of Narnia, there is obviously a lack of diversity in most of those. I don't think there's any single black person in Lord of the Rings, but I don't think it should be a big issue. Or even if it's a big issue, I don't think we should continue to cry over spilt milk. What's been done has been done. And people are saying that it is legitimate because within the frame of reference, the European frame of references was devoid of black characters, or they didn't really have interactions with black characters. That is why they are telling their stories, their folk tales from their points of views. But which is it's quite interesting because we have orcs in these movies, in these books. We have talking dragons, we have talking beavers, we have hobbits, we have elves. And are we saying that at some point in European historical frame of references, sorry, historical frame of references, they came across some of these things like elves and talking beavers, and they didn't come across black people? I was watching a short documentary on YouTube, and it was about a lady who was seeking after the. She didn't know there was a black Roman emperor, and he actually lived in England. So she was shocked, flabbergasted to find that there was a black emperor who lived in York, who sort of protected Great Britain from northern invaders. And when you go into the British Museum, I believe his bust is the one that greets you. His name is Septimius Severus. And remarkable story. The guy who she was interviewing said, "This is the real Game of Thrones," which I found quite amusing because Game of Thrones itself, all the characters in Game of Thrones, all the black characters in Game of Thrones were either a riffraff or slaves. But we can't continue to struggle for representation in these things. I don't think we should continue to struggle for representation in these things. And it's not as if I don't love those things. I love some of these books. I love Lord of the Rings. And growing up in Africa, studying literature, you are, sorry, just a second. These are some of the things you would come across. This is Homer's Iliad. This is Dante's. I don't think this is just in front of. This is the Divine Comedy by Dante, if I'm right. Yep, that's the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. How do I pronounce that? And you have a personal favorite, which is A Thousand and One Nights. Of course, there is Macbeth. There is, in fact, the whole works of Shakespeare. We had to memorize some of the sonnets and some of his poems. We had to stage some of his works. I think I played in Merchant of Venice. But we were exposed to some of these things, and these things were for us the sort of legitimate kind of literature, and whatever exists somewhere else is perhaps fringe. And because of these things, Black people, people who love these books, people who love fantasy, who love literature, who love high fantasy, are saying we need greater representation. And I am saying perhaps we should look for an alternative. So people are saying that these stories should keep their purity because perhaps if you eject Black characters or Black casts into these stories, you probably have sort of corrupted the essence of it all. And I am saying that it is time that we told our own stories. For those who think that Europeans didn't come across Blacks in their history, in their historical frame of references, I think that's a bit disingenuous because we have someone like I just mentioned, Septimius Severus, the Emperor of Rome. You have Hannibal, the great general. You had Mansa Musa, who went to France and actually wrecked the French economy for a while because of all the gold he brought in. We have the Moors who ruled Spain for about 800 years. And so they can't genuinely say that there were no interactions with Black characters. Even Tolkien, who was in the British Army, I'm sure he must have known that during the World Wars, black fighters fought on the side of England, and even in India sent troops to fight for the Brits as well as most countries in Africa. So I think it is either a deliberate disregard for African stories, for African frame of references, for African narratives, or it is just perhaps a shameful oversight. Be that as it may, Black people should learn to tell their stories themselves. And you can't tell me we do not have a wealth of a trove of sort of arsenal where we can have stories from. There is lots of great empires within sub-Saharan Africa and even the greater African region. You have the Songhai Empire, you have the Meroe, you have Napata, you have the Nubian Empire. Talking of the Nubian Empire, I remember when I bought this book. This is The Daily Life of the Nubians. And this talks about different iterations of the Nubian empires, whether as Napata, as Meroe, the new dynasty, and Kerma, and all that. I remember when I bought this book, I was quite young. I was still in college and broke. So when I asked the fellow how much the book was, he looked at me as if, what is this one trying to do? So I told him I was going to go home and bring money. And the guy just, he flagged me off like, eh. But anyway, I returned, and that day I bought this book, The Daily Life of the Nubians, and Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. And the guy was like, you know what, I'm going to give you a discount because it is almost impossible for me to see a young man who come and throw his money on a book that is probably going to be boring. But we have these stories. We have stories of kingdoms across the whole of Africa, great kingdoms across the whole of Africa. The Mandi Empire. You have Timbuktu that people have sung songs about. So we have some of these materials to draw from. We have history on our side. We have folklore. We have tales. We have myths. We have legends. Even for me, who grew up in a small country in West Africa, that is in Sierra Leone, we have really complex folk tales, and some of them could rival what Homer could produce. Some of them would rival Harry Potter and stories that we all love. So what I think is, to some degree, we keep recycling some of the stories. How many versions of Clash of the Titans? How many iterations of Hercules? How many versions of Cinderella and stuff? And I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't also explore stories from other parts of the world. But the responsibility is on us as Black people to begin to tell our stories, to begin to push our narratives out there. And like one of the proverbs I love, I'm sure you must have heard it because I've said it before. It says, until the tale of a hunt is told by the lion, the story of the hunt will always favor the hunter. We have to start telling our stories. We have to find the platform through which we can actually disseminate these stories and share it with the world, share it with people who wouldn't have thought that they could find quality material, quality literature, quality fantasy, folktale, epics, high fantasy from other parts of the world. So, whether or not Amazon decides to stick with some sort of purity with in the Lord of the Rings, in the Rings of Power, it is what it is. Let us just tell our stories. Peace.